The standard narrative presents U.S. involvement in Vietnam as ideological containment under the domino theory, a body of historical research centered on French military intelligence records, declassified materials, and especially Alfred W. McCoy's The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia, 1972, with later editions, documents a parallel structural story. Successive Western intelligence services used, protected, and expanded opium-heroin networks in the region to fund and sustain covert anti-communist operations. This facilitated a major shift in global heroin supply, from the Mediterranean French Connection to the Golden Triangle. French foundations. Operation X, 1951-1954. After World War II, France abolished its official colonial opium monopoly, but faced acute funding shortages for the First Indochina War against the Viet Minh. French intelligence, SDE, and the paramilitary Groupement de Commandos Mix Aéroportés, GCMA-MASG, took the trade underground as Operation X. Key elements included purchases of raw opium from Hmong Mio and Thai Highland producers, notably via leaders such as Tu Bi Lai Phung. Air transport Douglas DC-3s from northern Laos Tonkin areas, e.g. Plain of Jars, to southern bases such as Cap Saint-Jacques, then by truck to Saigon. Sale to the Binh Xuyen criminal syndicate, led by Le Van Vien Bay Vien, which refined and distributed opium through dens and further channels, including links to Corsican networks. High-level sanction by figures including Carl Maurice Belleau, Gen Raoul Salan, and operational direction by Maj Roger Tranquier. Proceeds funded Maquis guerrilla units and intelligence operations. One documented 1953 flight carried 1.5 tons. An internal investigation after a 1952-53 warehouse seizure produced limited reprimands. The system continued until the French withdrawal after Dien Bien Phu, 1954. McCoy and other researchers note that excess opium sometimes reached Corsican syndicates, contributing to the later French Connection pipeline. The United States provided substantial financial and material support for France's war effort in the early 1950s. Estimates of the U.S. share of costs rise significantly in the final years. After Geneva, American intelligence and military structures moved into the resulting vacuum in South Vietnam and neighboring areas. American inheritance and expansion in the Golden Triangle U.S. agencies, particularly the CIA, developed alliances with many of the same Highland groups and regional power brokers. In Laos, the Secret War, the CIA built a large Hmong irregular army under Gen Vong Pao. Air America, the CIA's proprietary airline, and related logistics provided the primary air transport into remote opium-growing areas. Documented patterns, primarily from McCoy's fieldwork, interviews with participants, and contemporaneous reporting, include Hmong and other allied forces loading opium onto aircraft. Air America and associated flights moved it to regional centers such as Long Tieng and Vientiane. Protection or tolerance of warlord allies who operated refining capacity. By the late 1960s, laboratories in the Burma, Laos, Thailand border zone, Golden Triangle, produced high-purity No. 4 heroin, China White, often with chemists of Chinese origin. Distribution into South Vietnam, where it reached U.S. troops. Contemporary estimates, Army medical officers and a later White House survey indicated substantial use among lower-ranking enlisted personnel by 1970-71, figures commonly cited in the 10-15% or higher range for certain cohorts. One survey put common use near 34% of combat forces surveyed. The CIA consistently denied a policy of trafficking or institutional profit. Declassified statements and internal reviews emphasized that any movement of opium occurred through Allied personnel and that the agency's priority was anti-communist operations. McCoy's core finding that the agency provided transport, arms, and political cover to allies deeply involved in the trade, and often looked the other way, has been partially corroborated by later admissions of awareness and by the practical realities of relying on self-financing irregular forces whose main cash crop was opium. Critics of McCoy argue the agency did not systematically organize or profit from the trade at the highest levels. Collapse of the French Connection and the supply shift 1971-1975. Through the 1950s, 1960s, the Marseille-based Corsican networks, French Connection, processed Middle Eastern, mainly Turkish, opium into heroin, and supplied the large majority of the U.S. market, commonly estimated at 80-90% at peak. Intensified Franco-American law enforcement cooperation. The 1971 Turkish ban on opium cultivation and successive laboratory seizures in and around Marseille dismantled the core infrastructure by 1972-73. Production and refining capacity expanded rapidly in the Golden Triangle. Vietnam's wartime logistics, ports, airfields, and the presence of large numbers of American personnel provided both a ready consumer market and onward transit opportunities. After U.S. combat troop withdrawals, 1973-75, ethnic Chinese syndicates and residual Golden Triangle networks retained dominant positions in the international trade for a period, marketing the refined China white product. Assessment Covert Intelligence Infrastructure, first French, Operation XGCMA, then American, CIA, Hmong Alliances, Air America Logistics, did not invent the regional opium economy, but it systematically leveraged and expanded it for operational funding and alliance maintenance. The ideological framing of anti-communism supplied the public justification. The logistics of irregular warfare supplied the practical incentives and cover. The result was a durable geographic and organizational realignment of the global heroin trade toward Southeast Asia. Primary documentary foundation remains McCoy's research, bolstered by French military and intelligence accounts of Operation X and by contemporaneous U.S. reporting on GI heroin use. Official U.S. positions emphasize operational necessity and denial of direct agency trafficking. The pattern of intelligence services tolerating or facilitating drug economies among proxies has been observed in other theaters, though each case has distinct local dynamics.